Yeah, I like the direction this is heading. I never got to fully review last year's Black Shark 3 gaming phone, but I got to play with one for a while, and the Black Shark 4 shows us there's room to refine the gaming phone concept. Simplifying the outer shell, it's a little less Mountain Dew fueled in design, and adding some compelling hardware for gaming, this is a solid step in the right direction. It kind of looks like the love child of an LG V60 and an Honor View 20, those fancy, fun laser style glass backs. This is my first experience with a Snapdragon 870, and I've been anxiously excited to see how it stacks up to this year's new Snapdragon 888 and if it shows much of an improvement over last year's 865. And for some decently powerful specs, this slab starts off at an entirely reasonable price point on pre-order today. You're gonna get a lot of phone here for that $499 MSRP, and with a very specific focus on the audience who might want one of these. Gaming phones are now some of the more complete options for powerful devices with premium features, which makes sense considering the demographic. Extremely fast charging because you don't want a lot of downtime. Super high refresh rate displays, all the way down to a proper cabled headphone jack for the convenience of completely lag-free audio. There's certainly some overlap with a premium phone, but while all phones can play games, not all phones are gaming phones. The killer feature here are these magnetically retractable shoulder buttons. Two switches flanking the power button pop out these triggers, which can be programmed for on-screen controls in your games, or they can be mapped for other shortcuts during normal phone operation. We've seen a couple options for adding shoulder triggers, but this is probably the most fun in terms of tactile response. I know it is kind of silly, it seems really small, but this kind of customization makes a huge difference in what kinds of games you might want to play on a phone. For example, I really can't stand playing first or third person action games because on a phone, you can't really move and look and shoot all at the same time without adopting some kind of hand cramping claw grip. With programmable shoulder triggers, it's a lot easier to map two key control options to the shoulders while you leave your thumbs free to move around and look. Or in a more arcadey game, you can move and shoot with your thumbs, and you don't have to take your thumbs off the main controls to use an alt weapon or another power-up. This brings us so much closer to the kind of mobile gaming experiences we might find from dedicated mobile gaming hardware. Better still, there's no fiddling around with an external controller. It's all right here on the phone. And at this price, there's a niche argument to be made about the person who might not want to buy a phone and a portable console when they can get both in one gadget with some reasonable compromises, because the rest of the phone is pretty solid. I love this power button fingerprint sensor. It's the smoothest operation I've seen yet on this method of unlock, and I greatly prefer this kind of hardware solution over an in-display fingerprint option. The haptics when typing are pretty nice on the fingers as well. I don't think this is the most powerful haptic motor you're likely to find, but I like that the buzzes and pops come in a bit more detailed, because I'll happily trade outright haptic power for more nuanced responses. The motor producing more of a pop than a buzz or a fuzz on the Black Shark 4. What's more than a little bit crazy here is the charging. Battery life has been about par for my usage. If you game on it hard and you're keeping the screen set to its maximum refresh rate, you're keeping it really bright, you can nuke this battery easy. But using that split battery trick inside, where the phone is topping up two cells instead of one larger cell, this 120 watt charging brick is silly fast. I went from 8% remaining to 95% charged in under 15 minutes. That is an impressive feat. It kind of blew my mind that it really did work, but I feel like I want to caution folks how they use this. The phone ran noticeably warmer to the touch, charging that fast, hotter than using 65 watt warp charging on a OnePlus as a comparison point. I have to believe this puts some additional wear on the battery. So in your battery settings, I'd recommend using the intelligent charging, which adjusts charging speed against the phone's temperature. And I'd also probably caution against running the phone hard while charging this fast just to reduce some of the additional wear and tear. I mean, seriously, it charges so fast, just put the phone down, let it top off for a couple minutes, then get back to the game that you're playing. Moving on, the cameras on tap were better than I was expecting. They're not going to win any awards, but they're more than functional. And it's really easy. It's really not hard getting some good shots out of this setup. You'll need to get a feel for them. But as far as compromises go, I think we're in very good territory to balance some of these features against the overall price tag. The comparable performance in good light is better than we often hear about on gaming phones. Shooting in good light is kind of a no-brainer. Your shots are probably gonna look good. As long as you're aware that more challenging lighting conditions might be a bit trickier to capture than on a current premium phone, which is gonna be more expensive, I don't see any deal breaker performance. We got techies out here acting like Annie Leibovitz, but showing off samples of low effort porch shots. Short story long, I think you're gonna be fine. Better than fine if you keep your expectations a little in check. But before we move on, I have to shout out one feature I absolutely love, and I think this is cribbed from LG. It's the only other manufacturer I've seen do this. There is a setting, it's not on by default, where you can activate a focus and shoot tap mode. The focus indicator becomes your shutter button. And no matter how you hold the phone when lining up your shot, it's just plain easier to shoot. Anywhere you can focus on the screen, you can shoot without having to move the phone in your grip. It's a photo feature I've always missed terribly whenever I'm not using an LG. But the core focus of this phone is what deserves the lion's share of the analysis. Unfortunately, it's also a little tricky to discuss the power. Gaming hardware should represent a particular focus on performance, gaming features, and balanced by an appropriate price point. The hardware in this phone is a minor refresh to the top of the line SoC from last year. A lot of my scoring and benchmarking is in line with the Note 20 Ultra, about where we would expect the Snapdragon 870 to fall. That means this is horsepower on tap, which is gross overkill for average consumer daily smartphone needs. We're at an interesting crossroads here. Generationally, the 870 slots in between the premium phones from last year and the top of the line phones from this year. But it's not a perfect across the board improvement. We're starting to push phone chips into almost laptop level power consumption. And performance is always going to be a series of pros and cons. Some apps respond to this hardware really well, they're optimized for it, and other apps can struggle with that optimization or other thermal issues. The Black Shark 4 can outperform a Galaxy S21 in video rendering for one part of my test bench, and then fall behind a Surface Duo in my audio mixdown test. Qualcomm is pushing more power out of this design. That also means there's a little less padding or room for thermal throttling. We see peak performance in line with last year's Red Magic 5S, which has an active cooling fan, but in a batch photo test, the Black Shark throttles more aggressively than any phone I've tested to date. In years past, it was easy to hold up one phone and then get a newer phone and show how across the board performance improved. I feel that was the case going from the Snapdragon 820 all the way through the 855. Phones launched in 2015 through 2019, consistent improvement, like stair steps. If we're really gonna get our maximum money's worth today, the conversation needs to be a little more nuanced. Even when we're comfortably in the mid-range, these things are expensive, so we should care how they perform on real-world apps and not just regurgitate synthetic benchmark scores. To that idea, my experiences gaming were a little mixed. Immediately firing up some of my favorite twin stick shooter, arcadey kinds of games, frame rates were lower than most of the phones I reviewed last year. Now, I imagine this is one part optimization needed from the app developers, and one part updates needed from the manufacturer. At maximum graphics settings, a game like Tesla vs. Lovecraft really isn't playable here, which is surprising given how well this game plays on most phones from 2020 and a handful of phones from 2019. But even on an older game, Bright Ridge, where it's been really easy to demonstrate improvements from year to year, the 870 here is performing noticeably worse than on most of the phones with an 865. I'm not entirely sure what to attribute that to. Going from an 865 to an 865 Plus showed frame rate improvements. Going from an 865 Plus to an 888 showed improvements. I don't think it's the app when we see a drop in frame rate going from an 865 to an 870. And again, a game like Dead Cells, it plays at a rock solid 60 frames per second, which is good. That's eminently playable and it looks smooth. But this is a game that can peak at 90 frames per second on a Pixel 5, on an obviously less powerful Pixel 5. Checking out an older game like Dead Trigger 2, I don't think it's the phone's fault that frame rate is capped at 60 FPS. I believe Dead Trigger is a game that has to manually whitelist phones for higher performance frame rate options, and the Black Shark doesn't seem to be on that list. Something a little heavier, I was really worried about Pascal's Wager when I first fired it up and I only saw 30 FPS, but that game has a performance limiter on by default. And for a decently console grade Dark Souls clone, the Black Shark has zero issues keeping up 60 frames per second at the maximum, the ultra image quality. And lastly, one of my favorite racing games, Riptide Renegade, is just flat as a table at 120 frames per second. And that does look really good. So that takes a lot of explanation, going through different genres of games, playing them for long enough to get a feel for them, and then looking at these charts and graphs. Why not just look at synthetic scores? When we look at Geekbench, we see a phone that outpaces nearly every phone we tested from last year, and sometimes by a sizable margin. However, those synthetic benchmark scores have proven to be poor predictors of real-world performance. And there's this wide swing, there's this huge swing of performance when we take into account the different kinds of games people might play on a phone. So just because you have a great benchmark score, it doesn't mean that phone really can play a game better than a phone with a lower benchmark score. The Black Shark here helps support a conversation that I've been covering over the last year. There's precious little performance testing on phones. Year over year, manufacturers throw out bold claims about improvements and getting more power, but the real world performance you can really throw at an app is a lot more nuanced. One last concern for the Black Shark, and this one is a bit more minor. I can't find a way to get a video out of the USB-C port. I'm hoping there's a setting I might be missing. If there is, drop me a comment. But that is a nice feature to have on gaming hardware. Just like a Nintendo Switch, I enjoy firing up games on a TV, and with decent controller support, there are a number of titles where a phone can pull that trick off really well. I don't think that's a deal breaker, but it would be nice to have. So we should probably wrap this up. I've been rambling on for just a bit. Where's that leave us with the Black Shark 4? This is a solid gaming offering at a very good price. The thing about gaming phones, I personally don't think the hook is having a high refresh rate screen. Since the days of the Razer phone, I was really hoping we'd see more games properly support these fast screens, and that would be the killer feature for a gaming phone. Our more demanding console and PC ports still struggle to beat 60 frames per second, and older mobile titles that should put out 120 Hz or faster won't universally support all phones. Across all phones with faster screens, the only thing you can really count on is a smoother app drawer. And that's not the gig for me. That comes with higher costs and a higher battery drain. I'm fine with an app drawer at 60 Hz. Instead, what makes a gaming phone more successful, in my not so humble opinion, are all the supplemental features. Getting a headphone jack back, silly fast charging, and hardware specifically built to improve those game controls. I might not be able to unseat a OnePlus 8T in all the games I play, and in a handful of games, the OnePlus 8T performs visibly better. But there are games I just won't play on a normal phone unless I hook it up to a controller. And the triggers on a Black Shark make those games better playable without any additional accessories. There are a few concerns about this generation of hardware, performance, thermal throttling, and I'd maybe be more concerned with the Black Shark 4, but again, at this MSRP, I think we're right in line with where this phone should be. It's tough finding another phone at this price that can hang with this premium tier chipset, and it makes a solid argument against used phone prices from last year. It can be a little frustrating when we know this phone should be able to put down more power at the wheels, and it absolutely still needs a little more update polish from the manufacturer. But at this price, it's going to be tough to outright beat. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these reviews, subscribing to the channel. Supporting your favorite content creators has never been more important than it is today. So I greatly appreciate those of you who are checking out the links in the description down below. Maybe you're shopping a little merch. That kind of stuff really does help keep production rolling on this channel. You can find a full list of all of my affiliates and partnerships over on SomeGadgetGuy.com, or you might consider, just maybe, joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This list is basically a collection of the coolest people on the web, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next video.